If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, Urban Explorers, what are some of the eeriest, creepiest experiences you've had? I was a couple feet into a massive abandoned hospice near my house when I took this photo. Seconds after, I heard coughing followed by some footsteps that sounded like someone was dragging themselves down the hallway towards me. Noped out. A few weeks after, I stopped by again and ran into the groundskeeper. He gave me a wonderful tour of the building, and while we were on the second floor, we heard a door burst open and what sounded like something metallic fall, followed by water spurting. The groundskeeper books it down the dark hallway while screaming profanities left and right. I caught up to him in a dark stairwell where there was water quickly filling up the room. Someone had broken in and stolen a pipe. Thought I'd leave the entire album here for anyone interested. So there's a moderately well-known abandoned mental hospital close to my town. A few months back, a few friends and I went to explore a bit. Not a rare thing for people here. We found this setup of a few folding chairs and a couple of old mattresses with blankets and whatever else you'd imagine on them. We chilled there for about 10 minutes and then went on with our adventure upwards. Pretty uneventful from then on. A few really cool graffiti murals, awesome view from the roof. When we were coming back down, we passed through the room and all the chairs were folded up and neatly stacked against the wall, and the beds were made. Or at least as close to that as it could have been. Whoever did it would have most likely known that we were there and waited for us to leave to do all of that, as it was only a time frame of about 45 minutes. No threats or anything, just an eerie feeling of being watching in an abandoned mental hospital. I live in a small town in a relatively secluded section of it. One of my favorite things to do is explore the woods in the area. Deep in the woods one day, I found a small house about 5 or so miles from the main road. I hadn't come across it before, but I didn't think much of it as there are many abandoned buildings in my county and a handful in the woods I tend to explore. I stepped into my new find and saw some stuff that creeped me the fuck out. There were pentagrams on the walls, but not graffiti. Carved. And like I said, 5 miles from the road and 7 from my house. Kinda far for some edgy teenagers to go to when there's one down the road. There was also a no trespassing sign outside that I ignored, and I found out soon it was not just a leftover sign from the last owners. I walked into a few other rooms. Mistake. A guy, 30 or so, sick looking, with cuts on him, was sitting on the floor in his underwear. There was a dead raccoon next to him, but I didn't see anything else because I ran full sprint about halfway back to my property. I was so fucking spooked I forgot that I had my damn 9mm with me the whole damn time. I don't think he saw me, but I haven't been that direction in the woods since then. Me and a friend made the mistake of exploring an abandoned park right next to a ghetto in the town our school was in. There were 4 giant concrete racquetball courts in the very back, hidden behind a wall of newly sprouted trees, bushes and weeds, and we decided to take a look inside. They all had these super heavy-duty steel doors for whatever reason, so it took both of us to push them open since the hinges were rusted over. When we got inside, there was a circle of flattened cardboard boxes, old mattresses, dirty pillows and sleeping bags, all facing the middle of the court, where there was a sun-bleached skeleton of a squirrel splayed out like it had been dissected. The roof of the court was covered in a chain-link mesh too small for any birds to get through, so the bones were still in their original positions. Around the squirrel there was a circle of half-used candles and a crudely spray-painted pentagram on the floor, with a metric-ass load of satanic graffiti absolutely covering the lower half of the walls. There were also holes punched into the cinder blocks with branches sticking out, most of which had a mutilated baby doll hanging by the neck. It took us a while to notice one of the sleeping bags looked like it had someone in it. It was perfectly molded into the shape of a human body, and it was so dirty it looked like a brown liquid was oozing out of the bottom. I was absolutely sure we had found a human body tied up in this sleeping bag. Right before we were going to go to the payphone to call the police, my friend noticed there was stuffing poking out of the top of the sleeping bag. He grabbed a stick and unfolded it, and a great sigh of relief was had when it was just a nasty sleeping bag full of stuffing from the baby dolls. We didn't go exploring in that part of town after that. I live in a big US West Coast city. In a neighborhood where most homes go right up to the sidewalk property line and have a yard in back. My place is the opposite. House is at the back of the lot, front yard keeps me buffered from street noise. It's a nice, dark little oasis in the city. My house has a double door, split door, so the top can open independently of the bottom. I often leave the top open when the weather's nice. I'm sitting on the couch in the living room, all of 15 feet from the door. It's nighttime, I'm reading, and the door's more or less directly in front of me. The porch light's off, yard's dark, the only light's from the dimmed reading lamp I'm using. The wind keeps blowing the top part of the door open, closed, open, closed. I'm used to it, Happens all the time, doesn't sound out of place. Until the door kind of misses a beat, I don't hear it thud closed. I look up, and it's perfectly still, only open 2 or 3 inches. It's one of those WTF are my eyes seeing moments. There's like a 15-mile-per-hour wind outside. How is the top part of the door partially open and perfectly still? Then my eyes or brain recognizes it, the outline of a hoodie, drawstrings, hood up. In that instant I am frozen and my heart is pounding. Someone is literally standing right there, hood up, holding my door open. I can't see his face, but he sees me noticing because he says, "You should keep your doors locked." Motherfucking what? Now my adrenaline kicks in, I jump up shouting, "He bolts." I get the porch light on in time to see him running out the gate. I still wonder how long he'd been standing there or WTF he was doing/thinking. The door has been very fucking locked since then. In my early 20s my friends and I would go explore an abandoned town called Padova City, or Tranquille, near Kamloops, in British Columbia, Canada. The entire town up and left one night, really suspiciously in the 1950s, and left all their belongings there. There is an entire network of underground tunnels under this town that connects all the buildings, asylum, school, laundry house, residence houses, dining hall, etc. Apparently they did experiments on people, like trying to connect an arm where their leg should be, and then stored the mutilated dead bodies in the tunnels afterwards. But the tunnels are a story for another time. Some people think this town was a secret military base because it was right between a river and some train tracks. The town was its own isolated covert operation. This place is now haunted AF and has all sorts of creepy paranormal events going on. I could tell you many stories about all the times we explored. We had to be careful though because the groundskeeper would try to catch trespassers and shoot us with a hacky sack gun. Anyway, there was this huge old asylum/psych hospital that had been converted into a tuberculosis hospital before abandonment. One time me and 3 friends went into the abandoned asylum and started walking down the main hall on the first floor. There were nail/scrape marks on the walls that peeled the wallpaper down in a creepy way, like someone was trying to claw their way out of there. There were old rag dolls and kids' balls left in one room, with a few aged wooden blocks. We got the feeling that we were being watched. All my hairs were standing on end. We kept walking past one creepy room after another. I was walking in the front with all my friends walking in a line behind me. All of a sudden we heard this really loud hiss sound, almost like the sound of a ton of air being released from a hose, really quickly. It came from the room just in front of me to my right. We were about to walk past the open door. It scared the shit out of us, so I started reeling backwards into my friend. We all turned on our heels and ran out as fast as we could. It honestly sounded demonic at the time, but it's possible that a wild cat, like a mountain lion or something, could have been in one of the rooms and hissed. Either way, something was warning us to get out and we were too scared to wait to see what it was. I have other experiences here, but they are more paranormal in nature. This one story was the one that left me questioning what that hiss was. We were definitely not alone in there. Anyways, after exploring that place on a handful of occasions, I decided to never go back there again. That place haunted me for years. It's been around 6 years since I've been there and I'm planning on never going back again. That place is infected with evil and I don't want to get mixed up with it again. Rural experience. A graveyard behind my high school in the middle of cornfields was a go-to driving around spot because we had nothing else to do as teenagers. Early on in the school year a lady parked her car in the back of the cemetery and walked into the cornfield and shot herself in the head. The graveyard is super old and on a gravel side road, so no one noticed for like a week. Kids who were running cross country smelt something rancid and reported it. Once it was investigated, the truth came out: it was weird. She wasn't even from my area. She drove around 2 hours here and had no relation to anything around the area. No note was left. It was really bizarre. Anyways, we were driving around months later telling the story to some younger students. Really trying to freak them out, but when we turned the corner to pull in the graveyard, a random car was parked in the back of the yard. We slowly rolled up on it while all of us were losing our minds, only to see a topless woman sit up from the backseat followed by a topless man. Awkward, but that was the tightest my butt had been clenched up to that point of life. When I was in high school, my girlfriend lived in Topanga Canyon, which is a pretty bizarre place filled with bizarre people. Well, one night I was leaving her house and I had to walk down the road to get to my car. Road in quotes because most of Topanga's houses are accessed by barely single-lane cracked tar roads with stumps and stuff coming up through them. It's like a 10-minute walk down the hill and I get to my car and get in. It's pitch black. I sit there for a moment and before I turn my car on, I hear a noise. Thinking it was an animal, I didn't move. How am I supposed to know if a bear or a mountain lion can break into a 1990 Volvo 240 DL? I hear the noise past the car, but I don't see anything. Literally nothing. I freeze. After about 5 minutes, I decided that if it was something dangerous it would have stopped, so I turn on the car. I switch on my headlights and drive the rest of the way down the hill. That's when I saw them. As I turned onto a wider road, I see 2 people with black cloths draped over their entire bodies, no shoes, walking slowly down the road in the direction I'm driving. The cloths must have been velvet or similar, because they were pitch black even as my headlights passed across. I gunned it around them and turned onto the main road, and watched in my rearview mirror as my taillights' red color faded on their forms. I then realized that if I had left my girlfriend's house about 30 seconds later I would have literally walked into 2 people, wearing jet black, walking slowly in total darkness in the middle of the night in Topanga. Just got a shiver thinking about that. This was back in summer 2012. Every morning my mum used to take me and my brother to our grandparents, while she went to work. My grandparents lived in a really isolated rural zone. Near my grandparents' house there was a huge abandoned factory, and I've always wanted to go to see what was in there. So I begged my uncle, he lived at my grandparents' house, to explore that building. He said yes, so we went to the building and searched for an opening to get inside. Once inside, we started to look around the place, and obviously found nothing except old machines and stuff like that. When we was about to leave, we heard noises coming from upstairs, and then steps. We saw a shadow coming towards us, so we got the feck out of there running. A few days later, I was at my grandparents' house with all my cousins. Suddenly, the neighbors rang our doorbell, and told us that there was someone breaking into our back garden. My uncle went out to check while one of my cousins called 112, local police number. Soon after the call, my uncle came back inside, and he told us that he saw that guy that had broke in, running towards the old abandoned building. I never discovered if the guy in the building and the other in the garden were the same person. Pretty fucked up story. One summer when I was a kid it somehow got popular to explore the storm drainage system underneath our neighborhood. Yes, like the ones in it, but just boring concrete. These were the round tunnels made from pre-made pieces. Getting into the pipes required crawling through a tight fit for 15 to 20 feet, but after that you could stand. As you explored the system you'd find areas that were big enough to drive a golf cart through, though it would have been impossible to get one there. Occasionally there would be odd structures, like grates that looked like prison bars that only covered half the pipe. Very rarely there would be light coming in from a grate in the road above, but most of the time we needed flashlights to see anything at all. Every single sound was nerve-wracking, because technically there shouldn't have been any sounds other than running water down there. Of course, we weren't the Goonies, so we didn't have a map or the sense to make one as we went along. Most of the local kids had gotten to know the system well enough to navigate though, and we figured out that if you got lost, you just always chose the turn that led to a bigger pipe, because the biggest one ran about a half-mile outside the neighborhood and emptied, in a 15-foot plunge, into a local pond and creek. Well, one day my brother, who was essentially fearless, and some friends decided to go a different direction from the main junction to explore a tunnel none of us had ever ventured to. I admit it, I was too scared. I don't know why on that day I was creeped out, but I was. So 2 friends and I stayed in the junction while my brother and his 2 friends went exploring. After they were gone for 10 or 15 minutes we heard terrified shouting and running footsteps echoing down the tunnels, coming toward us. My friends ran. I wanted to run, but that was my brother down there. Finally, through the dark tunnel I heard one of my brother's friends shout, "Go!" We all ran the big tunnel, because instinctively we knew that whatever was down there would catch us if we had to shimmy back through the small pipes to get out the way we came in. So we ran, hard, flashlight beams bouncing off the walls, until we finally started seeing light from where the tunnel emptied into the pond. One by one we all reached the drop and just kept running into thin air, falling into the pond below. I was terrified of heights and I didn't even know how to swim, but that didn't stop me. As I was making my way to land my brother and his friends came shooting out of the pipe and into the pond. For a moment I thought they had been playing a prank on us, but no, my brother immediately insisted that we all go home. He wouldn't even tell me what happened on the entire, dripping wet, almost a mile walk. The whole group went to my house and my brother, knowing we would all get in trouble, told my mother where we were and what we had been doing. He also told her that when he and his friends reached the next junction in the tunnel they were exploring, they came across a spot where light was trickling in from above. There was a pile of trash and debris built up around one of those half-pipe prison bar grates. And laying within that pile of trash, they saw a man, who upon hearing them, raised his head, reached out towards them, and started crawling out of the trash in their direction. So they ran. My mother called the police. They asked my brother to guide them to the location in the pipes where this happened. They found exactly what he described, but the man was gone. Within minutes there were at least a dozen police cars around our neighborhood with people and dogs searching that drainage system. They wouldn't tell us any details, but we do know that they never found the man. The dogs followed his scent to the end of the pipe at the pond, but they never picked up the scent anywhere on the ground around the pond or creek. As far as I know, none of us ever went into the storm drains again. I've been the creepy stranger. It was a few weeks ago. I needed time for myself, so I went to my favorite place, a nice bench at the edge of the woods, where you could lay down and watch the whole city. It was already dark, and after a while you could hear from a distance that there were some children, about 12, doing a school trip and did a night hike, I guess. So I sat there, chilling, minding my own business, when the children passed by in groups of 3, time after time. Some didn't even notice me, some were stunned for a second and stopped talking, but the last group was funny. One of the girls didn't seem to notice that I'm a human and started touching my head. When I turned around she ran away screeching. Thought it was pretty funny scaring them a little, even if it wasn't on purpose. It made me think of the night hikes I did in school and that the girls back then were indeed afraid of strangers just sitting around in the woods. One day, me and 3 of my friends decided to explore a local ruined mansion/tower that was once owned by a rather eccentric millionaire. When I say tower, I mean 14-story penthouse in the middle of the woods, with an elevator shaft up to it from the 2-story mansion below. The driveway itself is the only way onto property, without using a boat, as there is a moat around the entire house making it impossible to enter from any other way. We were all very bored, and I was about 18 to 19 at the time. So me and my friends decided to go and explore this mansion. We have heard stories about it, but none of us had ever actually been. The tower was very visible from a local highway, so we knew exactly where it was, so we decided to hike in. We decided to go around dusk, between 7 to 8 p.m., so lighting started to decrease by the time we walked the mile up the driveway to the mansion. After some time exploring and honestly not seeing much that was interesting, my friend decided to tell us a story of a party that happened here 10 plus years ago, where a drunk teenager fell down the elevator shaft and died. I had service, and my phone, so obviously I needed to consult Google to see how accurate that story was. Turns out it was very real, which kind of freaked all of us out a bit, as now it was very dark outside and we were in a ruined mansion. There were even a few articles claiming the tower was now haunted. After getting bored of exploring the basement/first floor, we decided to climb our way to the second floor. We got to a lounge-type room when we had our first scare. Looked out from a window and we saw a flock of birds take flight from the woods, like there was something out there. Normally I wouldn't be scared, it's just birds, I told myself. We keep exploring. At this point I was on edge myself, but I am not weak. I figured I'd keep exploring until my friends were ready to leave. We found a kitchen on the second floor, and that's when things started to go south. The kitchen was deep into the house, with no windows to the outdoors. We heard a door open on the floor below us and I heard the sounds of footsteps. We all stopped dead in our tracks and got as quiet as we all humanly could, listening for anything. We could still hear these footsteps downstairs and it totally freaked all of us out. We, quietly, decided we needed to sneak out of the mansion as fast as we could. We snuck to one of the second-story windows that had been broken from vandals, and were able to squeeze out and onto the first-story roof above the garage. Jumped down from there and bolted as fast as we can. I remember turning around as we ran and seeing the silhouette of a figure standing at the front of the house, no doubt who we heard when we were upstairs. We kept running to the end of the driveway, where much to our dismay, 2 cop cars were waiting for us. Apparently we had not been watched by some terrifying ghost or criminal or anything, sadly it was just the cops. Apparently they had laser tripwires installed to keep explorers away from the house, I have no clue why. Maybe for legal reasons? Anyways, at the end of the day I got a $250 fine for trespassing and a very strict talking to by the cops to never return to the house. Super creepy experience while it was happening, that ended up having a pretty normal explanation. It still seems like there is something about that tower that is odd to me, but alas, I will never know why they really care so much about people exploring. All in all, I'm glad it ended as it did. Cops are a lot easier to talk to than ghosts/criminals/whatever else could have made walking sounds below us. Always a funny story to this day, lol. I was doing a shoot for a student short film in an abandoned vicarage. The vicar has died that week and so one of the clergymen at the church were letting us use the building to film in. Things weren't right from the get-go. The vicar has only been dead a week but this place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Mail had piled up at the door and parts of the landing were starting to collapse into the lower floor. In one scene I had to take some tablets from the medicine cabinet and then look myself in the mirror all dramatic. We'd stocked the cabinet full of sugar tablets and fake medicine bottles so I could keep taking them. Later in the shoot I'd head downstairs and set the kettle going. We'd done this a few times and gone to shoot some other scenes at other parts of the house and churchyard. At the end of the shoot we were sat in the living room when suddenly some music started playing. Elvis Presley Can't Help Falling in Love. Shit. We turned the record off and started cleaning up. While we were in the living room someone had taken all the tablets from the cabinet and made us a coffee with the kettle I'd boiled earlier. Also someone had started reading the letters left at the front door. We legged it. I went to an old mental hospital that had been renovated most recently to be a retirement home. It had been shut down and looked like everyone just noped the fuck out. The rooms were still decorated, old files everywhere, looked like you could still sit in the beauty parlor and get your hair done. It was like they closed the doors and no one ever came back. Except for those who explored or burglarized. We caught video of orbs and voices. I didn't get freaked out until we were standing at the nurse's station on the second floor and it sounded like the elevator was coming up, complete with the arrival ding. There hadn't been electricity to that place in years. There was literally a hole in the ceiling in the other end of the hallway. No way that fucking elevator was running. Creepy shit. I had a blast reading through all the old files and looking through all the rooms at all the personal effects left behind. I even brought a few pics left behind home with me. Thought the dearly departed might appreciate that. Wasn't really exploring when it happened. I was about 12 years old, and my neighbor and I were walking down to the end of the cul-de-sac to the basketball court. As we neared it, we passed a house on the right and we could hear an indistinct woman's voice coming from within the garage. The light was on, but we couldn't see the woman. But she sounded kind of manic and desperate, and she must have been looking for something cause it sounded like she was rifling through stuff. We didn't stop to stare though, so we kept walking and kept quiet. We're at the basketball court for maybe 30 minutes and decide that we're done. We were feeling really off-put by the last we heard. So we begin to walk back. As we're passing the house we see her. She's at the driver's door of the SUV and she's struggling. We slow our walk a bit but we can hear this time. I'm gonna get them. Those little shits. I'll get them. I'll kill them. She looked and sounded insane. That's when she turned her head and saw us. We stopped walking and she stopped fumbling with the door and we just stood there for a second. She then rushed to try and open the door and I knew something was wrong. I turned to my friend and said, "Run." We bolted up the street as fast as we could, and from behind the ambient light from the headlights of the SUV lit up the street from within the garage. "Get off the street. Hide," I yelled at my friend. We hid behind a dumpster, and as soon as we ducked down the light from the headlamps peered straight down the street. She had exited the garage and was, presumably, in the middle of the road watching and waiting. We caught our breath and I said, "We need to split up. You run home and I'll run home." He nodded in agreement. On the count of 3, we go. On 3 we bolted out from behind the dumpster, the light of her headlamps from the end of the cul-de-sac shine on us like a spotlight and we heard her engine rev into life. My friend went left, and I went right. His house was much closer, mine however, was at the beginning of the cul-de-sac. And I knew I was running for my life. I ran, and I fucking ran as fast as I could. If it wasn't for the corner bend in the street, I'm sure she would have run me over. But I ran, and I can still remember the feeling of headlamps growing brighter and brighter as she got closer to me. I honestly thought I was gonna die, but I actually made it to my lawn chair moments before her big SUV blazed past where I previously was. She continued up the beginning of the cul-de-sac and then stopped her vehicle. I stood there watching her, afraid but angrier than I can ever imagine. Her vehicle sat there at the top of the street and then she peeled out and I went inside. Didn't tell anyone about it though. This still fucks with me to this day. Me and a buddy of mine in high school would go to this huge trail in the woods to smoke weed. It served as a dog trail to let them off leash a bit and have a good time, and we went late at night one night. The trail is basically a big circle through the woods. Anyway, one portion is on an elevated ridge, and the whole trail is dense woods. We noticed, somehow for the first time, a huge abandoned building down the side of the hill we were on and decided to check it out. We ended up getting in through the doors as they were tied shut with some BS wire. Mind you, that entrance is the only entrance we found. So once inside, it's pitch black, and the building is an old factory. You can't even see a 1/4 of the way across the factory floor, it's so dark, so we carefully make our way around together aware that something could be hiding in plain sight in front of us. I'd say the inside was about 4 football fields big, 2 fields side by side. In the dead center were monstrous machines with big arms fitted with single strands of what looked like yarn. I suppose when working they would all move around and do something like tie rope or come together in some fashion. What the hell do I know? We get to the final portion by where it turns out stairs lead up to a second landing, and slowly a parked car comes into view. This older Honda Civic, very good condition, definitely in working order, is parked right by the wall that encloses the staircase. I make note to my friend how strange it is, and how did it even get in here, and do you think there's somebody else here? I take a look through the windows and I notice a cell phone, blinking like it missed a text or a call. I show my friend and we are thoroughly sketched out. As we make our way around the car, the fucking cell phone starts ringing with somebody calling it, and it was on loud. We both look at each other and then run like 200 yards through blackness to the doors, up the hill covered in brush and back to the trail. We went back a few times after since our friends were curious, but to this day never saw the car again nor could find out how it got there, who owned it, and WTF was with the cell phone being called as we were basically looking into the car. The car was locked, by the way. Yes, I tried the door handle for the sake of trying. I went to high school in the Rust Belt in the USA. Essentially the area was booming due to the automotive industry. In 2008 a lot of factories closed down and we're left with the skeletons all over our pretty small town. Growing up we all knew that's where sketchy shit happened. I was a good little straight edge kid, so I never had any reason to go and explore. The girl I was dating at the time had a group of friends that were all going. I warned against it multiple times but they went anyway. It was late at night and I figured if I was the scariest thing they saw out there they'd go home. So when they left, we followed them, tailed them all the way to the buildings. I wanted to scare the shit out of them, so I watched them enter, and made my way to a window outside of the view of their lights. The crunch of broken glass and reek of old stone and urine overtook me. It took a minute for my eyes to adjust to the dark. I made my way carefully. I had to walk way slower than I planned to avoid making any noise and alerting them, deftly avoiding haphazard debris along the way. I can see the light like a miniature sun, and a loud clamor followed in their wake. They're heading toward the old assembly line. This particular facility wasn't huge, but there were plenty of scaffolding and platforming to walk on. They start shining their phone flashlights all over the room. I'm trying to figure out how to scare them but don't want to be seen yet, so I duck down to avoid the sweeping beam of light. There's a scuttling in the corner. All the cell phone lights chase the noise. I peeked from my perch and saw an older man running toward the group. I heard more shuffling from the doorway behind me. I'm basically shitting my pants when this skinny figure runs past my hiding spot, heading toward the stairs. For a minute I just stood there. I finally came to my senses and managed to try and find a way out. I found some weird containers and what I assumed to be meth pipes and foil all over the floor near the back entrance. Not sure if it was from them, but it was f***ing scary. My friends and I explored this abandoned asylum that also used to be a TB hospital, in Connecticut. We brought this glow-in-the-dark spray paint, and just sprayed a little dot every 50 feet or so, because we definitely would have gotten lost. This place was creepy as hell. I almost fell down an empty elevator shaft. Despite the spray paint, we still got turned around. We ended up in a basement area, and my friend opened a door when we suddenly got hit with the worst smell ever. Which was surprising because we had filtering masks on because asbestos/lead paint. But the smell was rank, and for some reason we looked for the source. We found a dog carcass left a bad taste in our mouths because 1. It was a doggy and 2. The dog looked absolutely mauled. Dog blood all around it, stomach open, and a leg detached. Worst thing I've ever seen in person. At this point we were like, let's get the fuck out of here because someone or something killed the hell out of that dog, and by the time we found the spray paint dots again, we realized that one of the dots was completely smeared and you could see a handprint in it. Of course at first we were like, alright, which one of you is pranking us, and smeared the paint, but when we quickly realized that none of our hands were glowing with spray paint, we ran out of there and out of a window faster than I've probably ever ran before. Was walking through a forest off the trail when I noticed an old foundation and remnants of a church along with various other foundations alongside the flat foundation or nearby. One freaked me out because it had a mound of clean deer skeleton and a mound of glass melted together nearby. Went home and did some research and found out it was a World War II camp for German soldiers that were captured and sent to the US. Went back the next several days and month to explore, finding all sorts of cool stuff. Then one day I saw a huge tree stump near the bank of the nearby creek in full view of the sun. I went over to it looking around for stuff and then found a photofilm canister. As I turned around trying to open it, I was face to face with 5 people in backpacks that startled me because I did not hear them approach. Turns out the canister had information inside it for part of an international scavenger hunt that was worth millions if the whole game was completed. This was the first of 4 times I would run into these canisters on accident in different parts of the world the next 3 years from teaching English overseas and taking random trips. Saw the same person from the first time every single encounter, and we both freaked out every single time it happened. To this day I still occasionally think that whenever I go somewhere random and have a feeling to examine a place, I will find another canister and see the same person again. 100% eerie. There was an abandoned canning factory in town we scoped out and ended up using kinda like a hangout spot at night with a few friends. But before that, myself and 2 buddies were checking it out during the day. On the second floor was a set of bathrooms, one male with all the urinals ripped off the wall so there were copper pipes sticking out. It was creepy and we tended to stay away in fear of being impaled. The woman's bathroom had 2 stalls and the toilets were still intact. One of my buddies had gone in there first, was standing on top of the back part of the toilet and looking into the ceiling. It had those foam board ceiling tiles with all the little dots in it from the 90s. Nothing really interesting, so we all piled out. I should mention this place had been abandoned for quite a long time before we explored it. We had seen the toilets, tried the sinks, no water anywhere. So there were the 3 of us in the hallway just outside the bathrooms, just starting to decide where to go next when all of a sudden there was a very distinct flush noise that came from the bathroom we were just in. We ran about 50 or so feet and stopped, turned around, and did the whole teenage nervous laughter, WTF was that, kind of thing. We headed back and found nothing, double-checked the toilets, and sure enough they were bone dry. My second story is from the Rockwood Psychiatric Hospital. We had slipped in the hospital at night to avoid being seen, and our plan was to set up hammocks, spend the night, and then do a proper explore in the morning when we had light. We called it a night around 3 a.m., setting up hammocks in some kind of kitchen on a 3rd floor. It was dead silent in the old asylum. 2 guys were sleeping on the floor in the gymnasium to the left and my explore partner and I had our hammocks in another room. As is to be expected, I was having a terrible time sleeping, so I would fall asleep, wake up and so on. At one point in the night I heard footsteps coming from the right side of our room. They were heavy and steady footprints. I was 100% certain this had to be a security guard or possibly one of the guys in the gymnasium. The footsteps continued and stopped at the doorway into the room we were in. So certain was I that we were about to be caught, I was waiting for a voice, or a flashlight, to shine in the room. I opened my eyes from under my hoodie, turned my eyes over to the door, and there was nothing there. In the morning, the other guy said they had not left the gymnasium where they were sleeping. Research on the Rockwood Asylum shows all kinds of stories from past employees who all hated working the overnight shift because of the shit they heard in the hallways at night. When I was younger I used to live in an apartment complex, and right behind it was a big wooded area. On the other side of those woods there was a big shopping center that we would walk to by cutting through the woods. Usually never at night because of how dark it would be, plus we heard stories of yetis being heard or seen in those woods during the nights, lol. But this time my friend and I were at the shopping center and lost track of time and remembered we still had to walk home and it was already dark. So now we're walking through and we can't see a damn thing, but we know we're about halfway through the woods at this point and there's a creek about to come up. To cross that creek we used a log that was laid down across it, and at the same time to balance yourself you had to grab the tree branches hanging down. So it's pitch black and I'm grabbing around trying to find the branches, and something jumps out of the tree at me hissing and tried to bite me, and now I'm yelling and freaking out, and my friend calms me down and tells me it was just a black cat and the cat ran off. So we waited a couple minutes trying to regain our composure because we still have to cross the creek. Now I'm just scared to even reach out for the branches, so I just very slowly start walking across the log, and out of nowhere something grabs my leg and I fall into the water screaming, and I'm kicking away yelling get the F off me, and I shine my phone light at it to see what it was, and it's a man's face. It was an older man literally laying on the log in the middle of the creek. My friend just started running and I kicked the guy in his face and ran the rest of the way through the creek to the other side and out of the woods. The crazy part is we ended up seeing the guy in our apartment complex days later, and turned out his wife had kicked him out for being drunk and he thought the creek would be a good place to crash for the night. I was in eastern Estonia as I was living there at the time. I was exploring some old abandoned Soviet buildings that had become overgrown with nature and had literal trees growing out of concrete buildings. We had no idea what kind of a building it had been, but on the first floor we found some factory equipment, a few gas masks, an office area with a broken desk and fan. But mostly everything was in ruins. It was real Fallout type shit. The building had 5 stories, but the ladders and stairways that we found had all broken down, and we were looking for a way to advance up to the next floor. I go around the yard, which had turned into a magical forest at this point, and realize there's a window ledge that I climb up with the help of a branch and can use to get to a stairway that has otherwise been barred. My friend is still walking behind me, as I jump over and sign for them to come over. However, when I land I see a big worn-out mattress laying in the hallway, and some kind of animal carcass next to it. I hear tiny footsteps coming down the stairs and quickly sign for my friend to be quiet. Suddenly a huge wolfish-looking stray dog wanders upon my path and looks startled to see me suddenly there, and I get just as startled too. I realize this animal carcass has probably been his former prey, and that he is either living here alone or at some point with a human companion. Me and the wolf dog have a moment where it seems like we're both trying to calculate our next move. As I see them grow increasingly tense, I slowly back off while maintaining my eyes on them and pull myself over the ledge again. They slowly inch towards me this whole time. I climb up and jump over back into the woods, and tell my friend that it's better that we better get out of here. Although the experience went pretty well, I honestly felt in the moment that if I had panicked or done any sudden movements instead of remaining completely still, I would have risked my life pretty bad. Once in Dundee, Scotland, me and a few friends went into an abandoned children's mental asylum. The story behind the asylum is that the head doctor who worked there went crazy and tried to burn it down, hence why it is now abandoned. Anyway, we were in there for a good while. There was graffiti around and broken glass, furniture and the such. We came across the canteen, which had them benches that had seats attached, just scattered around the room, and handprint paintings all over the stone walls from the children, which was creepy as it is. But we keep walking around and I head into a room wandering off on my own and take a look around and see lots of old paperwork laying on the floor, medical records, etc. But then by the time I'm done I realize all my friends are gone, so I freak out at this point. But I look outside and see all my friends had ran out, I'm assuming to try and fuck with me, so I head back out. As I walk back past the canteen, I look in and see that all the tables had been set up neatly in rows like I imagine they would have been when it was a working asylum. Obviously I was a bit freaked, but knew it'd just be my friends trying to mess with me. Then I get outside and I'm all like, "Oh, nice joke guys," etc. And none of them have a clue what I'm talking about, adamant that it wasn't them at all. But obviously I'm like, right, okay, but I know you did. Anyways, that was years ago, and recently me and one of my friends were talking about it and he still is adamant it wasn't them, which freaked me out more than when it initially happened, because if it was them, he'd have admitted it by now. So it's not something that freaked me out so much initially, but years after. And for anyone that's interested in the story, it was the Strathamartine Asylum. Really interesting history. Oh, I got one. I went hiking in the Tatras Mountains in Slovakia with my best friend. After half an hour walking up the road, we didn't even get to the real hiking trail. We spotted some abandoned buildings down a side road and decided to go take a look. When we got closer we realized it was an abandoned sanatorium. So only one of the creepiest types of abandoned buildings you could go wandering around in the mountains, in a foreign country with no other humans anywhere in sight. But we decide to look around anyway, taking pictures of the crumbling building, empty swimming pool, weird Soviet-era playground made entirely out of concrete, etc. The main building was super dark inside, and we didn't go further than the first room or two, which had faded children's paintings on the wall still and debris from when the place was still in use. We were already feeling a little freaked out but felt fine about being there outside at least. But then, we walked around the corner of one building and suddenly we heard music playing. Like from a music box, just like in a horror movie. We froze and looked around but there was nobody. We even managed to catch a few seconds of it on video before it stopped, although that phone is long dead and I may have backed up the video, but I don't know where, but still had no idea where it was coming from. My friend was super freaked out but I convinced her to stay a bit longer, although we definitely agreed upon not going inside any buildings anymore. After about an hour more it started to get dark and we unanimously agreed that we didn't want to be there without sunlight, so we noped our way back down the mountain quickly, having done no hiking whatsoever. Still no idea what happened. My best guess is that someone might have set up a motion sensor plus speaker as a prank. I was a 18-year-old female, walking home from a party that got busted by the cops. It was around 2 a.m. so I called a good friend so he could walk me home. I didn't live in a bad area, but I lived on the top of a hill with very few street lights and lots of blind turns. Roaming deer/bucks were super common also, but mainly I was kinda drunk and a pretty paranoid kid. I would tell him when I reached certain intersections so he'd know where I was, he'd jot them down and we'd go about talking as usual. About a block from my house there is a park with a bunch of big boulders and makeshift dirt ramps that kids use to ride their BMX bikes at. I'm walking across this completely open section of dirt, very dark, talking about some high school bullshit. Suddenly, 3 inches from the side of my face is this guy who lived a few blocks up the street from me. I had maybe seen him a handful of times in my life. Younger guy, late 20s, big dark hair and a look in his eyes that put pure fear in my heart. I yelled into the phone, "Someone is here," break off in a drunken sprint while my friend frantically asks me if he should call 911 on his landline. After about 30 feet I look back and he is just standing in the same spot, with only his head turned looking right at me. I kept running, told my friend I was okay and to not call the cops, got home in record time, vomited in the bushes, and went directly to bed. A few weeks later my dad tells me that a guy on our street killed himself. He hung himself off the family's banister in front of a giant picture window, for all the neighbors to see. My dad walks our dogs very early in the morning, 5 a.m., and was actually the first one to see him and call the police as his elderly parents hadn't woke up yet.